Hey everybody, welcome to the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, and I'm just going to tell you right now, you can't wrestle in here. This is the wrestling room. I am Griff from GA. Joining me today, Dan and Sergi from Pro Wrestling Musings, and you will notice that now you can see us if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, if you're listening, first of all, thank you. Second of all, go watch on YouTube, and then you can see us. There has been a ton of stuff in AEW to talk about. If you're a fan of the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, go check out our show with Cassidy Haynes of Body Slam. We talk about the CM Punk Daniel Bryan news, and we'll have a lot more to talk about that today, talking about Fight for the Fallen. But obviously, the thing that's on everyone's mind right now is the 10-man tag match that opened the show on Fight for the Fallen. So we're just going to start right there, because in this case, all good things do begin with, in my opinion, the best match of the show, and that was the 10-man tag. This was insane, but it also leaves us with a lot to talk about when it comes to the booking. So I think the best way to do it is just to dissect it, and we'll talk first off about the stats that we have. Some pretty good ones, if I do say so myself, courtesy of Craig from Pro Wrestling Musings. Sergi, I want to hand this off to you first, because you and I were talking during the match, during the whole show, and there was so much to pick up on, even on the little subtleties of what's going on here. So take us through this match, and I know you liked it, so take us through what you liked about this.
Well, it's been a long time since there's been a match with quite this level of stakes, especially a multi-person match. It's not a tag title match, but a many-person match with the highest possible stakes. Like the highest stakes match of this level that would be comparable to this would be Winter is Coming, Mox versus Omega. Just in the sense of, this is determining the direction that AEW is going. This everything comes down to this, and the stakes were higher, I think, than a lot of us realized, in the sense that I think that most fans thought that this was just a coronation. It's of course it's going to be Hangman. He's the guy, and we didn't really think it was his to lose, and it really was. The stakes, of course, is a big part of what makes a wrestling match compelling. A wrestling match can be incredibly technically sound and well wrestled. Without stakes, it doesn't have that compelling factor. This, of course, was really well wrestled, really well laid out. There was a lot of thought put into making it dramatic and making it make sense in terms of the story they were trying to tell.
Yeah, it's a really...
Which, watching it the first time, you might not have thought so if you thought thought Hangman was winning. It's like, where are they going with this? How can Hangman... Well, the answer was he wasn't. And as you look through the stats that Craig laid out, they make it very clear that the Elite had the game plan from the start of the match all through, and stuck with that game plan and succeeded at that game plan.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and this is why I love looking at the stats. Before I even really get into that, I just want to say the entrances, I thought, were absolutely brilliant. I loved the Dark Orders. I said it at the time that that's exactly what I want from the Hangman Page character. And it was like to a T. It was as if I had written it. I mean, it was obviously better than if I had written it, but that was the point I was trying to make, is that this is what I want to see from that character, and that's exactly what they delivered. The Elite were just smug, arrogant little pricks, and it was awesome. The fact that during the match they did the Melter driver, and then Nick was supposed to dunk the ball, and then he missed. I know that that's not intentional, but it made it so much funnier that he missed while doing that. So I thought, for all these guys, the characters were just great. But when you do look at the stats that Craig has made for us, I want to first look at the flow of offense, and I want to go to the 1 minute totals. And this is the one where Craig has noted eliminations as they happen. And you really get to see how well this match was structured from the 10 men that were in it, because you have initially this massive burst of offense during the 5-on-5 portion, and then when the first elimination is made, I believe it was Alex Reynolds was the first eliminated. Immediately it grinds down because the heels now have the advantage. So the offense total for both teams goes down, but the heels have the advantage the whole time. And then when you get an elimination of Carl Anderson, that's where things start to pick up. And that's how it goes for the whole match. And I love that strategy of doing it because it just shows you how strategically the heels went into that match and how well they planned out what they were going to do from a kayfabe perspective. Just how well they had planned out their plan of attack.
They were just absorbing the what's the word I'm looking for? The storm. They were weathering the storm and keeping the man advantage, but not necessarily trying to take the offense advantage. Only worrying about the man advantage until they got to that point where they had the overwhelming man advantage, and that's when they really took over offense, as you see towards the end of the match. And then there's one last storm of just Hangman putting in his final, what's the word? Just that last hope spot, the last attempt to convince somebody like maybe this is possible. Made an elimination still, even when it was 3-on-1, made it down to 2-on-1. But still there was no way to close the deal.
I think the other point that's interesting on that, if you look at when Stu Grayson was eliminated with Gallows, and then what happens after that, there's an immediate sort of dip down in the stats for the Dark Order at that point, and that doesn't surprise me because he was completely on fire in that first sort of 11 to 12 minutes. He really was their sort of MVP up until that point. And I wrote this week in our roundtable, who was the wrestler of the week? Well, the standout for me in that match was Stu Grayson. He was just superb. But ultimately he's got himself eliminated by being too excited and going out into the crowd, and that worked to the Elite's favour. Which again, everything you just said there, Sergi, they were just that their plan was better. They had everything under control. They didn't need to be attacking all the time. And once they'd lost that guy once the Dark Order had lost the guy who was driving them forward, it seemed from there that things went downhill for them.
One thing that I really like that Craig did for this particular match is in his 3-minute totals for the flow of offense, he's actually tallied up how many of those 3-minute chunks the Dark Order had the offensive advantage versus the Elite. And so there were 8 3-minute chunks in a 25-minute match. The Dark Order had the advantage in 6 of those 3-minute periods. So what it really shows you is classic heel stuff. At the end of the day, the baby faces are supposed to be the better wrestlers, and the heels are supposed to be doing, the cheating stuff to get ahead. And when you do look at it, there were 10 fouls committed by the Elite as opposed to only 1 by the Dark Order. So certainly that was the plan, but it just goes to the larger issue when it comes to the Elite. Not an issue in a bad way, but the larger point of the Super Elite, the Elite, Bullet Club, whatever you want to call them, is that they're just old school heels. I mean, they fought this match like it was a Survivor Series match in '89, and it worked because all of them are good wrestlers, and the Dark Order are good wrestlers. And the Dark Order, this is a big reason why I think it was so important that John Silver was healthy for this, because he just embodies the kind of guy who's going to make a match like this happen. He moves so fast. He gets so many moves in a short period of time. And that's exactly what you want to see from him. And you can look, Craig breaks it down minute by minute. And so you can see the point where John Silver gets in, and it's like minutes of entire domination by Silver. And that's how you're kind of putting over that the Dark Order can compete with the Elite. At the end of the day, the Elite sent 5 guys who are world champions. You got Omega, who's the world champion. You've got the Bucks, who are tag team champions, and you've got the Good Brothers, who are Impact tag team champions. So you have to be able to put over the baby faces in some way, and this is exactly how you do it.
And it felt a little bit like Elite knew that was coming from someone like John Silver. As Sergi said, they were sort of soaking up that pressure. They let him go wild for however long it was, knowing that ultimately they would be able to soak that up and come back. And the Bucks are completely capable of being that build attack as well. We've seen them do that when they were in the babyface camp in very similar matches. But it very much, the whole thing played out as a plan from them to sort of take advantage of the Dark Order's going too strong, too fast, and John Silver went out. And again, I'm just trying to think. I don't think John Silver really went out through sort of shenanigans, did he? He was basically just actually outdone. I mean, and dunked through. So yeah, it was whilst you'd normally expect the heels to sort of be cheating the entire way. Actually, I think John Silver was largely out through them just overpowering him. Really.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is that in these multi-man matches, like a War Games match where there's a man advantage on the way up, or a Survivor Series, they're kind of the opposite. Survivor Series on the way down, the heels usually get a man advantage, so that's what lets the baby faces stay underneath and fight from underneath, but keep their heat instead of needing quite so much cheating. Got that man advantage, that numbers advantage instead, and you can see it as a strategic advantage, or that they out-strategized instead of having to rely so much on cheating. They did cheat a bit, they did foul a bit, but their advantage wasn't based entirely on fouls and outside interference, like a lot of times is the case with the classic heels.
Yeah, that's a good point. You do, at the end of the day, these are your champions, so you do want to make them look strong. I mean, it's always a delicate balance with heels. We've said this before on the show. It's much easier to build a heel than it is to build a good babyface, but it's harder to keep a good heel looking legitimate, because if you do this stuff too much, then you end up in a situation where you're not putting them over as a good wrestler, you're just putting them over as a good cheater. Once in a million that works, a Ric Flair kind of thing, where the cheating is just part of it. Like, that's why you go see Ric Flair. But for a lot of guys, it doesn't necessarily work the same. And I think the Good Brothers are really good examples of that. When they wrestle, they're really effective. But when all they do is cheat, they get really annoying. Because that's not why you go watch a Good Brothers match or anything like that. I'm sure we'll use stats to talk about this, but obviously the question on everyone's mind is, it seemed that Hangman was the obvious decision to win this match. If he didn't, he wasn't going to be allowed to challenge for the World Championship. It certainly seemed as though everyone was thinking that he would challenge Kenny Omega at All Out. Didn't go that way. Hangman lost. It was a 3-on-1, so it certainly put him over in a sense, but he did lose. So from a booking perspective, this is a very interesting conundrum that we have here. So I'm gonna go back to Sergi. I mean, we'll all get to talk about this, but I'm gonna go back to Sergi because Sergi was the first that I saw that was talking about this and trying to figure this out and figure out what the future is here. So Sergi, from a booking perspective, where do we go from this point with the Hangman and Kenny storyline?
Well, we were chatting about this in the spoilers Discord live as we were watching it. And I've definitely changed. I know we disagreed a bit at the time, but in some ways I've changed my perspective a bit since then, because I was under the impression that the stipulation was that Adam Page cannot challenge Kenny for the world title until he loses it, and that none of the Dark Order can challenge the Young Bucks for their titles until they lose them. That's been clarified to me that they made it clear on commentary that basically the consequences for Dark Order was pretty much nothing, since they weren't ranked. They had nothing to lose effectively other than disappointing Hangman, which of course is important to them. That's I think where that part of the story is going to go, is Dark Order feeling that they need to redeem themselves. Whereas when I thought it was the other way around, I thought that that Hangman would be feeling very guilty that he led the Dark Order into losing any shot at the Young Bucks. That's not the situation. I really thought that they'd painted themselves into a corner. But knowing that it's not any kind of a strict stipulation that he can't ever challenge Kenny until he loses it at some point, I think that the natural way forward, I mean, it remains to be seen. They didn't really give us any clues as to where they were going with this, which I thought was that was probably the most unusual thing. They just left it there, in the sense of they just left it at huge disappointing loss, and what's next we don't know. No reaction, no no post-match promo of, well, now I'm going to blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to find that out on Wednesday. To me, the most natural thing, since the idea is that Adam Page has grown up a lot, that this whole process has been a big growing and learning process for him, and that that a lot of the mistakes that he's made in the past he's learned from. And to me, the most mature adult way to move forward is just to say, I made the choice to accept that stipulation. I wasn't able to get it done. And so I'm going to take my lumps and I'll grind until I get back to where I was. I know I'm going to win in the end. I just need to take the time to grind and get there. And if that's where they go with it, then I think that it's a pretty safe conclusion to make that the reason that they even went this way is that they want to extend the storyline to give them time to do some other things with the new stars that have joined the company before still eventually getting to the Kenny versus Hangman story a few months further down the line.
I do understand that. I've seen a lot of people that are speculating that the reason it went this way is because CM Punk may very possibly be debuting on AEW right before All Out. You know, they have that the first dance, the Rampage episode. We'll get to that in a second. And so there's speculation that they wanted to put this off because they want CM Punk in a situation like that. I'm not going to comment on that. It would be out of character for AEW to switch things around that drastically, that quickly, just for one guy. So I'm not sure if I believe that one. I hope that it's not the case, only because they've done such a great job to make Hangman Page probably the most over babyface, at least in America right now, if not in the entire world at the moment. And to me, if you wouldn't necessarily be throwing it away by extending the story because it's still there, but there will be diminishing returns at some point. Hangman has to be on the show in order to, continue to build him to the point where he can be a believable world champion. And so there's going to come a point where the fans have popped enough times without him getting close to challenging for the title that, it's not going to feel the same. And I think if it were to be, let's say they want CM Punk to come in and immediately win the world title, it's not the same if Hangman beats CM Punk. CM Punk's a great heel, but it's not the same. There's no storyline between Hangman Page and CM Punk. So, but that's all speculative, of course. Mm-hmm. Dan, where did you come down on the booking aspect of this? If you could put your fantasy booker hat on right now, where do you come down on this? Where do they go from here?
Know where they go from here, because I think, as you said, we were all assuming it was building to All Out, and that's where Hangman Page has had his failures, his biggest failures. Like, it felt like it was all building to the point where he gets his redemption at the pay-per-view, where he's had his biggest loss, and I don't think he's had a win, has he? Yet the two All Out so far. And in terms of what Sergio was saying, the grind to get back to that top of that list, there's not time to do that now in terms of between here and All Out. I think the interesting question is actually which event do AEW see as bigger, All Out or that Arthur Ashe show in New York? Because I do wonder if it's a position where because I don't think the reports today are that Adam Page won't even be at All Out at all, won't be performing there at all. That's what I've seen from Meltzer and from other people. Obviously, you've got to take Meltzer's reports and AEW with a certain pinch of salt, but that seems to be the report today. But you wonder whether they're building to that, huge Dynamite show instead. It would be very interesting to see how they do this. I don't think they are replacing him with a CM Punk or a Daniel Bryan. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think there is a longer term plan, and I don't think either of those two will be challenging Kenny Omega before Hangman. I really don't. But I think we might get an interim, whether it's a Christian Cage or something like that in the meantime, and do wonder whether maybe they're lining up for that Arthur Ashe show.
Yeah,
I think that one of the comparisons that I hear As far as the diminishing returns that you were mentioning, Griff, is that people compare it to TNA waiting too long to pull the trigger on Samoa Joe. And there's a reason that I think that comparison isn't as apt as people think it is that Samoa Joe, it's a matter of the character archetypes that the wrestlers represent. Samoa Joe, as a character archetype, was Godzilla, you know, whereas Adam Page is a cowboy. You know, Adam Page is probably the best example of the character archetype is Die Hard. He's supposed to be dragged down to he's supposed to go through all kinds of crap. Whereas, Samoa Joe, everything about him, he's supposed to just stomp on people, and you're supposed to cheer for the stomping. And there was the way that they delayed Samoa Joe definitely took the wind out of people's sails with their love of him because it went against his character archetype. I don't think that's true with Hangman Page. I think that the people's love for him can survive this. And I think they can survive this better than if they had decided, oh, hey, we want one more big disappointment for him. We're going to have him lose his challenge of Kenny Omega the first time. Losing this instead and not being able to get there right away and having one more roadblock but that's not a loss to Kenny Omega, I think makes more sense if you want to have that one more obstacle that he has to get through.
And the other thing is that with, as you said earlier, Sergio, with the fact that Dark Order could still build up to a tag team match with the Bucks, and we saw a lot of interaction between Hangman and the Bucks in that 10-man. We obviously had the callback to the pulling the leg, all of that. If he's not going to go for Kenny Omega straight away, absolutely could be involved in helping helping Dark Order, whichever of the two tag teams they decide to go with, getting that title off the Bucks. So there's certainly stuff that he can do to be in that storyline, to be a proper baby face, to help the team that's helped him get back to where he wants to be, and at the same time sort of fighting back against the Bucks, who really were the start of a lot of this storyline. So there's certainly things that they can do, and that's why whilst I understand why people might be slightly concerned that it feels like they've sort of changed the story, that suddenly they're focusing on someone like CM Punk rather than Hangman Page. I really do trust that they're going to build that correctly, and then maybe this is just adding in an extra step one way or another.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sergio. I think you make a great comparison of how Hangman and Samoa Joe are not similar, because you're absolutely right. The characters are different, and in a big way, there's a difference between being a babyface and being cheered like a babyface. We talked about this on the podcast a lot of times before. Fans can like heels. It's okay. We talked about it in the context of Britt Baker. It's them being a heel is the feature, not the bug. And so people liking Samoa Joe because he beat people within an inch of their lives, that was the point. That's why people liked Samoa Joe. People like Hangman Page because he's relatable, because he has that kind of human quality to him, and because he's cool. And that doesn't go away from doing this. My only concern is that you now have to put him back into the story somehow. It would be like if the stipulation was you drop out of the top 5 if you lose this match, and so then he has to fight his way back into the top 5 to become the number 1 contender. Fine, that's totally fine. My only concern is how they're going to find a way to get him back into the title picture, because Kenny Omega has to be the champion when Hangman Page becomes the world champion. It won't feel right if they do it any other way. So that's really my concern, is how they're going to figure out how to do that. And I think there are options available to them. But I think this goes to something that Sergi was saying on the night, and I've seen a lot of people say on Twitter that this may be the worst scenario that we get, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad scenario. It's just a matter of how they book their way out of this. And, talking about another trope that we've talked about on this podcast a whole lot, AEW has built up that trust with me where I believe that there is some way they can book their way out of it, that they've thought this through. And they've earned that with me. So I don't expect that to go away right now, but it is a point where, we need to have faith that AEW has something going on here for the Hangman and Kenny storyline.
Mm-hmm.
I think the concern slightly would be, for me, that anyone they do bring in to face Kenny in the meantime, like everyone will almost sort of know that they're not going to be the one who beats Kenny. Like I mentioned Christian Cage earlier, and I would love to see a Christian Cage versus Kenny Omega match. Don't get me wrong, but it's going to feel like step on the way again to the Hangman v Kenny match, and I can't think of anyone else on that roster who wouldn't feel like a step in the way at the moment. That's part of the problem, and I think the more you delay that match, you sort of diminish the interest in the intervening matches, certainly. But yeah, I agree with you, Griff, that they have certainly, particularly with this storyline and with these characters, they've earned the trust of they should have earned the trust of the fans to let them get it right.
Mm-hmm. And I think a really interesting part of this is that because we do have that trust, and because we don't see the way forward, and we're sort of in this situation of, I trust that you have a plan and that this story will be good, but I don't see how it can be. The way that they've sort of artificially, in a way, raised the stakes for themselves is in itself kind of its own entertainment. Of there's a sort of a thrill of how are they booking their way out of this one? Where are they going forward with the story with this? They must have a plan because they always have in the past, but I can't see it. So we get to go into. We go into this Wednesday with more mystery of where on earth are they going with this story than there's been in a while, which is really interesting because it's been. Before this, it's been one of those sort of stories that makes us go, well, this is pretty predictable, but predictable isn't always bad because we want the story to just play out straight and it'll be fun, even though it won't be surprising. And it's completely flipped. It's the opposite of that now. It's like, I don't know if I'm on board, but we'll see what they do.
It's good. It's good to have a mix. Some of the best stories of all time were very predictable, and some of them really were not. So it's a matter of how you deal with it, rather than us being able to say, oh, this was the right decision, this was the wrong decision. But that's what we do. We have a podcast. We talk about wrestling. That's just it's in our nature to say things like that. After a match like this that went almost half an hour with so much emotion attached to it, and such an unexpected result and such a disappointed result. You can hear the air just get sucked out of the arena when Hangman got pinned. When Kenny hit the one-winged angel, you just heard the whole arena just go absolutely silent, which is probably what they wanted. That's the desired reaction for a heel. But after that, it's kind of hard to build back, and I think AEW knew that, so they hit us with several quick segments that were designed to further other storylines. So we got Pac and Andrade, and furthering that whole thing that we talked about, I think, last week on the podcast, that the possibility of Andrade reforming Los Ingobernables and something like that, and he's targeting the Lucha Brothers. We got that segment. We got Ricky Starks celebrating the FTW Championship. Brian Cage comes in, and then we got Hiroshi Tanahashi challenging for announcing his challenge for the U.S. title, the IWGP U.S. title, at some point down the line. So they hit us with all three of those, and all three of them I thought were pretty good. I think Andrade's a good promo. I think Brian Cage is a really good babyface, and Hiroshi Tanahashi is a phenomenal wrestler. So no complaints from me. Dan, what did you think about these three storyline segments here?
I think it's so telling of where AEW are at the moment that you can just throw that and go, and they just casually announced that Hiroshi Tanahashi was going to have a match.
I actually made that comment to a friend of mine that I was talking.
I
was like, they're just casually announcing Tanahashi.
It's absolutely insane, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely amazing stuff. The Andrade stuff, I'm still not quite sure. Again, it looks obvious where it's going, and if we get there, any interaction between any of those four, let's face it, it's going to be fantastic in the ring. At the moment, it's not, for me, the most compelling thing that they're doing. But again, it took, 40 seconds, so you can't really complain about that too much, to be honest. But But yeah, the Tanahashi stuff is really interesting because it feels like they're building to Tanahashi Moxley, which obviously we see later as well. And that is just that's a phenomenally exciting match. And whether that's going to happen at All Out, I don't know. But again, as I said, just the idea that AEW can just do these things at the moment, it's so different to anything we've seen in wrestling for decades now. I can't think of the last time where you'd be able to sort of fantasy book a match like that and there actually be a possibility of it happening. And particularly off the back of, again, I don't know if you guys saw it, but the Tanahashi Shingo match, which was superb in New Japan, which I think they had, 2 days to put that together as well. So if they've actually got a long-term plan for Moxley v Tanahashi, then blimey, that could be something very special. But yeah, it's I think those 3 segments are just a sign of how much is going on in AEW and just how exciting it is to watch all of it at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I should mention, by the way, that Brian Cage did his best Lance Archer impression. He came out and he hit one of the band members over the head with his own drum. Which that's the kind of thing that I really love. I loved it. It's one of my favorite all-time moments of Dynamite when Lance Archer threw that guy through the ceiling. So I love I love dumb stuff like this because it doesn't work for everyone, but for guys like Archer and Cage that are supposed to be built like these monstrosities, that's exactly how you do it. I mean, you just have normal-looking people like you or me just getting absolutely destroyed by these guys, and it just goes to show you, you know what, these guys are bigger and stronger than your average human being. So I did love that part of it.
I thought Cage was actually very good in that. I think the way to make him a good babyface is to not have him talk too often. I think it's a fair criticism of his in that sense. But as you said, smashing a drum over someone's head, always good. And I think when we do get to that, I think they're going to sort of keep putting that off at some point. But various things will be put in his way. But I think when we finally get a sort of a clean Cage v Starks match, it'll be a great one to watch.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Starks is back.
Also, trombones have no place in wrestling. That was a good line. I one of the things I found really funny was how, as a heel, it makes sense. Stark sort of leaned into being the hometown boy of a different hometown. Like, why are you making such a big deal of being from New Orleans when you're in North Carolina? That was amusing to me. Tanahashi. It was such a strange way to introduce him. Just like this. It was like a Zoom video. Like, hey, it's Tanahashi. Like, wow, it sure is. It was very surprising. They've had a lot of Forbidden Door breaking, but it's probably the biggest one. There's.
I think it's the biggest star to come through the Forbidden Door for sure. I think Kenta was cool when he did it. That was really cool.
I was gonna say Kenta's close, but
I think Tanahashi's on another level. I agree with you there.
When you see that from the cheers that he got, just from a promo, like you got the cheers in the background, and I was going back to I think it was a Jericho, back when it was his 50th birthday, and I think Tanahashi did a short thing on that back then, and he got cheers then when some of the other sort of Japanese people didn't. So I think they know what they're doing there. They know their crowd love him. And as you said, it's enough they can just be on screen and say, "Hi, I'm Tanahashi," and that's it. It's over.
I think it's important, the casual nature of this whole thing. Like Sergi said, it's one thing if you make a huge amount of fanfare over it, and with Kenta they certainly did, because Kenta came in and everyone reacted the way they did, and it was such a crazy moment, and he attacked Moxley, and that all went down the way that it did. And now you have Tanahashi, who is a bigger star than Kenta, at least in the U.S., is more well known, and he just shows up Like there was nothing, there wasn't an announcement, there was nothing. He just like Skypes in. He's like, "Hey guys, I'm challenging for the U.S. title." Like it's incredible how far this whole thing has come. It was last year. It was around this time last year. Not even. No, it was December. So we're talking like 7 or 8 months, when the first Forbidden Door break was Kenny showing up on Impact. And now you just have one of the biggest stars in Japanese wrestling in the 21st century just showing up on Dynamite unannounced. It's crazy how far this whole Forbidden Door thing has come. And hopefully we'll see some more. Maybe it will be Moxley Tanahashi. Obviously, everyone's waiting for Omega Okada doing that again in the U.S. That's been thrown around a ton. I'm sure that we'll get a chance to talk about our dream matches when it comes to New Japan and AEW at some point. But since we're on the subject, let's go a little bit out of order. We'll just talk about the U.S. title match because we're here. Tanahashi said that he would challenge the winner of Lance Archer and Hikuleo, and obviously Lance Archer did win that. It would be very surprising if Hikuleo won in Lance Archer's first defense, but I thought it was fine. Ryan had said last week on the podcast that Hikuleo is not on the level of Archer or Moxley as a wrestler, which is true. It has to be said. But I think he still held his own pretty well. The fact that Haku came out with him, his dad, I thought that was really cool. People really did react to that, which was awesome. And he's a big dude. He kind of used his body and threw himself around. But I do think at the end of the day, when you look at the stats, it was essentially a 7-minute squash match. Lance Archer was better in pretty much every category. Big offense did belong to Hikuleo because they're trying to put over how big he is, and so Lance Archer he had no strike downs because he couldn't take him down. But other than that, Lance Archer was clearly the better wrestler in this sense. But I thought for what it was, the match was decent. Dan, what did you think of this one?
Well, firstly, I think we were just all very lucky that everyone got out of that building alive, considering both Haku and Nick Gage were in there at the same time, and that was an insane combination of people. I
was drinking water, you
actually,
bastard.
Really, Haku. I'm sorry. But it was exactly what I expected it to be. Actually, it was sort of as you said, I think 7-minute squat. It wasn't quite a squash, but it was a 7-minute demonstration of the fact that Lance Archer can take apart someone regardless of how big they are. And actually, the main offense that came in on him was actually from Haku on the outside. So I thought it was an important sort of step for Archer, actually, because obviously it feels a little bit like he came from nowhere to win that match against Mox last week. So I think they needed to have him a relatively dominant performance against someone who looks imposing, and I think that's exactly what they achieved. I think it was sort of good business, if not the most exciting thing to actually watch on screen. Mm-hmm. What I do like is just looking at the statistics of this, and not a single second of submission work in this match at all. Just pounding each other. None of that technical nonsense.
Exactly. 36 strikes in 7 minutes, no submissions. I do like that. I can get down with that.
No submission.
what I think it's kind of unfair to Lance because he got Hikuleo up for the blackout, and everyone was just like, Hikuleo's almost 7 feet tall. And he's this massive dude. He's bigger than Lance Archer. And he gets him up, and everyone's like, oh, okay, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Lance Archer just gets this guy up. But when Ethan Page did it, everyone went absolutely nuts, which they should have done, because when he did it to Bear Bronson, everyone went crazy, which is good. It's just unfair to Lance Archer that because he's so big, no one's ever going to be impressed when he gets someone up for the blackout, even if they are as big as Hikuleo is. So I felt bad for him. I am impressed by what Lance Archer did. Oh, man.
He made it look easy.
Change up his finisher or nothing like that.
It's made it look too easy. I think that was the problem. It looked effortless, but actually, I went to a Rev Pro show a couple of years ago, and Hikuleo was there, and it's just ridiculous seeing someone like that walk past you. So the idea that you could lift someone up like that, turn them over in the air, and just plant them, it's
yeah, no,
very impressive. But I think you're right. He deserves more credit for that.
Yeah, I've been courtside for enough basketball games to see men of that size, And so I'm just like, how are we not talking about anyone lifting a guy like this? I'd be impressed if the Olympic weightlifting gold medalist lifted someone like that. So good for Lance Archer. That's what I'm saying. Let's backtrack a little bit. Let's get to the tag match, Proud and Powerful versus FTR. This was a really interesting one because it felt like there was a lot of story going in and there was not a ton of story going out. Now there was an issue with Cash Wheeler where I think he cut himself on a connector between one of the barricades, I think was what was being reported. Our friend Cassidy over at Body Slam was talking about this a little bit after the show, and he cut himself pretty bad unintentionally. And I think they had to get to the finish earlier than they expected in that one, is what I saw. Now, granted, I didn't notice that they had to rush the finish, so maybe that's just me, but I think these teams are really excellent, so I think they covered for it well. But, I mean, it just seems to me like there wasn't a ton of story in the match, and I don't really know where the story comes out of this match. So, I don't know. Sergi, help me out here. What story are we looking at with Proud and Powerful and FTR, or is there going to be any more?
Oh, I can't think that it's over. I just think that this little chapter didn't go the way they intended to due to circumstances beyond control. They probably had plans for that match that would have made it the continuation of the feud more obviously compelling. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's a great story. You've got these two groups that both came up from poverty, and they don't have a lot of respect. Well, they have a lot of respect for each other in one way, but they also are doing that. I had it tougher than you. You don't know what it was like thing that people from different kinds of tough backgrounds can tend to do. It's like, you don't know what it's like to you know, in the slum of a city. It's like, you don't know what it's like in, you know, in rural poverty. It's you know, a whole different thing. And I think that's a good story. I think that's an interesting story, and one that doesn't seem over because, well, that might just be biased on my part because I really want to, I mean, and also just the fact that, well, where are we headed with this? Are we headed to whoever comes out on top of this feud ending up at the top of the rankings and going after the Young Bucks? Well, the Young Bucks are heel. It makes more sense for it to be Santana and Ortiz. And also, Santana and Ortiz, and especially Santana, have been fantastic on the mic and with their charisma and just this really over babyface thing since the Inner Circle Pinnacle, since they turned babyface, basically, since the Inner Circle turned babyface, Santana has really been impressive as a babyface, and so it just makes more sense for them to win the feud, which makes me think it's not over. Yeah,
that's a really good point. I have had this, I want to say it's a suspicion, but really it's just what I want. I really want Santana and Ortiz to win the tag titles at Arthur Ashe. I think they've made such a big deal that they're from New York, and they take so much pride in being from there, and they're really over, especially Santana, like you said. I mean, that's, you know, Ortiz is great. It's not like Ortiz is chopped liver in this scenario, but Santana especially has been doing phenomenal work, and they are really over. They were over in front of the North Carolina crowd, and remember, FTR are from North Carolina, right? I mean, and so this should have been, and FTR are over as well, but they're over as really good heels in this kind of effective sort of way. So I want Proud and Powerful to be champions at Arthur Ashe. So maybe I'm just trying to will that into existence, but so losing a match like this is not bad. It's a little weird just because it was clean. And so it's fine because FTR is really good. So you know what? I'm kind of talking myself out of having an issue here. There was no issue. No issue for me. I think this was a really good match, and I think when you look at the numbers, one thing that stands out, you can tell when a team is when AEW is trying to put over a team or a wrestler without having them win, and this is pretty much exactly what it looks like from a numerical standpoint. Even though FTR had about 60% of the offense, as we know, when you're heels, that's generally what happens, especially in tag teams, because FTR excels at this, right? The whole cutting the ring in half thing, that's been FTR's MO forever, so, since NXT. So that's just what they're going to do. But Proud and Powerful, in terms of big offense, led 27-15. That's how you put over a team that's not going to win. Because they were the better team for a large stretch of this match. They were the more impactful team, even though FTR on an absolute basis got more of that offense in. So, Dan, if Sergi and I are correct, and there is going to be another match between these two teams, how do they go about setting that up, and who should ultimately win that?
It's a tricky one. I actually feel like this whole feud between these two teams has been a little bit sort of snake bit from the start, because it all started with that brawl with the Inner Circle versus Pinnacle at the start, where was it Ash got gashed in the head accidentally. Their interaction in the Stadium Stampede was a bit weird in the nightclub, and I'm not sure that was particularly well received. The segment last week, which felt like it was all sort of cut short for whatever reason. I don't know if that was timing issues or whatever it was. Just felt strange, and I think going back to it didn't feel like there was that story there because it didn't get the time last week to build it as much. And then this match this week, I mean, even before the injury, and I obviously agree it was obviously cut short or changed ending for one reason or another. The crowd weren't going with it at all, one way or another. It was very quiet compared to. I mean, obviously off the back of the 10-man tag, maybe that was too much too soon. But yeah, it just felt like it wasn't quite going there. I feel like they need to build this up more and give it its own thing. Maybe have it headline a show at some point. And because I completely agree that we should be building to a Proud and Powerful winning Arthur Ashe. That would be an incredible moment. And you need them to be credible contenders when we get there. So having lost to FTR, you do wonder what the next steps are. So to be perfectly honest, I'm not quite sure what they do at this point. One thing they might do is sort of talk about the Inner Circle, and maybe Proud and Powerful sort of pull themselves away from that completely in the next couple of weeks. Just really sort of separate themselves from the Inner Circle and say, look, we need to focus on ourselves now, that sort of thing. Go off with Conan on their own and do it that way. But yeah, I'm not quite sure, again, how we get from a defeat to FTR to them challenging the Bucks in what is a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, it's what, 7 episodes? It's about 6 weeks away. So 6 or 7 episodes of Dynamite, a few episodes of Rampage as well, which we will get to in 1 second, and then All Out. So there's enough time to build them as credible contenders, I think, but that does mean that if there is to be a rematch with FTR, they do have to win it. So I think you're right. There's a lot of questions to be asked about this particular one. But, I guess it connects to what we were saying earlier with the whole Hangman and Kenny storyline. AEW obviously has something planned. So, and it's possible that Proud and Powerful actually don't win the tag titles in New York. That's just kind of what I want to see. It's what a lot of people want to see happen. So I think that would be great. If it doesn't happen, then presumably we'd actually be getting Young Bucks versus FTR in front of a full crowd, which is also, that's a pretty solid consolation prize, I think, because the first time we saw that dream match, it was in front of, what, a couple thousand people, if that. I don't remember how many fans were there when they first did that, but it will not be the 17,000 people that will be in Arthur Ashe for that show. So either way, I think either of those two options will work for me. I just kind of hope it's Proud and Powerful winning the titles. Hey, sorry, Future Griff, got to cut in here. Full disclosure, we had an issue in our recording that chopped off the last half of the podcast, so we've had to now go back and record it, which is cool, except we've lost Dan. He was so annoyed by the whole process that he's just quit the whole thing. And, no, I'm just kidding. He's in England, so he had to go to bed. But we do welcome in Jacob, which is good for a reason that you'll find out a little later. So Jacob will help us do the rest of this podcast as we cover the second half of Dynamite. So I apologize for that. Also, incidentally, that's the reason why you can't see us, even though I said you could. So next week you will definitely be able to see us. But I did say that, and we haven't delivered. But next week we will deliver. It's going to work next week. But for now, we got to get into probably the reason why most people are watching any kind of coverage of Dynamite, and that is, of course, the announcement of the first dance in the United Center in Chicago for the second episode of Rampage. It certainly seems as though CM Punk is making his way to AEW. I don't know how else to read all this. So there is a lot to go along with this, but I think the most important thing is just to look at what he's doing first, and it certainly seems to be something involving Darby Allin. Allin was the one who cut a promo referencing the best in the world. So it certainly seems as though Allen's going to be the guy to face CM Punk on his first day. So Sergi, let me ask you this. Is Darby Allin the right guy for CM Punk?
Absolutely. I definitely was, even before Darby Allin did his promo, when Cassidy Haynes let us all know that CM Punk was coming. I take that back. He was the one who broke Danielson, I should say.
He confirmed the CM Punk story.
Sean Ross Sapp confirmed that CM Punk was coming. Cassidy Haynes did say that he was about ready to break the story, and remember that he was like, "Hey, have you heard about this?" It's like, I'm about to send publish. But anyway, when that was first broken, there was a lot of speculation. What do you think? What's going to happen? And there was a thread going around among us of, well, who do you think their first feud would be? And my call was Orange Cassidy for Danielson and Darby Allin for CM Punk. And the reason for that is to do with the way that they each do their thing in terms of how they tell stories. Danielson is fantastic at telling stories in the ring with his physicality. His physicality in a ring tells you a story about, whatever kind of story he wants to tell. It could be a serious story. It could be a funny story. With Orange Cassidy, of course, it would be a funny story, probably. And both Danielson and Orange Cassidy are really great at that physical comedy. So that, I think, would be an awesome first feud for him. And then Darby Allin and CM Punk, we're talking about something very different with them. Of course, they're great in the ring, but they tell stories with their words, and their stories tend to be about their philosophy and how it contrasts with who they're feuding with. And in the past, CM Punk has always had this, had someone with a big contrast. Your Cena, Raven, people that their personal philosophy had a major noteworthy contrast with CM Punk's. Now, here we're talking about a difference instead of generation. Of here's someone who is so much like I was when I was that age. Punk, different, loner, straight edge, all those things. And is he going to look at me as a mentor? Is he going to look at me as someone that he looked up to? Or is he going to look at me as some kind of a sellout? You say the things that I believe, but I don't think you really mean them the way that I mean them. There's all kinds of ways that they can go with that similarity, but difference of generation between those two. And I think that the possibilities for storytelling are really great, and I am definitely looking forward to that being a major feud that could last for months and, could be returned to over the years within AEW.
It's such an interesting way of looking at it, because I hadn't really thought of the way that their philosophies contrast with each other. And so to me, when I saw it was Darby Allin, I was kind of like, it kind of makes sense. He's a homegrown guy, so you want to immediately, it's a better look for AEW to put a homegrown guy in there rather than putting another ex-WWE guy. I mean, I don't want to hold it against them. I hate it when people do that, when people are like, oh, AEW is all ex-WWE. Like, that was the only show in town for decades, so that you can't really avoid that. But it is a better look for Darby Allin, who achieved his star power in AEW. So I do like that. Jacob, let me ask you this. You've come in, obviously, at the right time, as we're just casually fantasy booking CM Punk in AEW. So the short term certainly seems to be Darby Allin, and I agree with Sergi that it's an enticing feud, both promo-wise and match-wise. I think Darby Allin's easy to work with, because you can really do whatever you need to do with him. And you can get a lot of offense in, and it'll be very believable. We talk about that all the time statistically, that Darby Allin just absorbs a lot of offense, so it'll be easy for Punk in that sense. But Jacob, I want to ask you long term, what should be the goal for CM Punk? Should he be involved in the World Championship picture? How quickly should he be involved in the World Championship picture? I mean, what should his AEW career look like in the longer term?
Well, I just want to start by saying that I believe, personally, that I've been hot tagged by fate to be in this episode of the podcast for multiple reasons, one of which we'll get to at the end of the show, but the other of which is because CM Punk is probably the main reason I got into wrestling in late 2009, early 2010, because it was his cage match against Jeff Hardy, which was Jeff Hardy's farewell match at the time. That really hooked me in, and then pretty quickly after there, you got to the Summer of Punk, and you basically had that whole big boom period, and then they, messed it up, and then all that. And then him leaving was actually one of the first things that got me in sort of to the insider portion of wrestling. It was that big thing that made me want to go like, okay, well, what's actually happening here? Like, what's the story behind this? So in a lot of ways, CM Punk is the reason I'm doing this now. And so him coming into AEW is such a momentous thing in my time as a fan, specifically. And him coming into AEW where he can basically be anything he wants to be. I almost don't want to speculate exactly where he's going to go. Like, I'd love to see him challenge for the title. I just love to see him do anything in AEW, really. I think if I had to choose something that I'd like to see him do, and something that sort of fits in line with him as a character, him coming in just to make AEW better than it already is, saying, I'm going to be the piece that makes AEW, that would be a great thing, because not only would it be him and his sort of arrogance coming in and trying to, in kayfabe, overshadow everyone else, including a top prospect like Darby, but also it would be him, in a way, I don't want him to say it directly, because people get really mad when people take shots at WWE, but it would be his way of sticking it to WWE to be like, I was the person that made AEW number one.
That would be interesting. So you're thinking sort of a heel character for Punk. I mean, would that work? Like, is the guy ever going to be booed no matter what he does, or does he need to be for this particular character?
Here's the thing. I think AEW has done a good enough job of saying, like, yes, we have heels, yes, we have faces, but it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. Because because people come in and they're just people. They believe what they believe, then they're cheered or booed based on what the fans want to do. Like, MJF, like, he gets boos, but he also gets a good amount of cheers. But that doesn't, like, just because he gets cheered, it doesn't mean he's a face. And if CM Punk comes in, he's going to get massive cheers, but he's not, like, he doesn't have to act like a baby face just because he's getting cheers.
Yeah, and I actually think that it would add to this sort of character that we're talking about, because you can have baby faces go to him and be like, you're acting like a dick, and he says, well, look, all the fans love me, so I like it's us against you pretty much. And I like that. I like it when heels can reference the fact that the fans are on their side. Like The Rock was great at doing this. That he would always reference that the fans were behind him, even though he was supposed to be the bad guy. And to me, that's the difference between being a great heel and being sort of a victim of circumstance. So like it's the difference between The Rock and Triple H, essentially. Triple H never really got how to handle the fans when they reacted a certain way to him. So there were times where his heel run was weird because he didn't know how to react to the fans, but The Rock always did, at least after the whole Rocky Maivia thing. Anyway, I like the prospect of CM Punk working his way up the rankings. And I like the idea that AEW will say, look, you are one of the biggest stars in wrestling in the last 10, 15 years. You're one of the biggest stories in wrestling ever when it comes to this. But you got to earn your keep here. This is actually something I promised Dan I would shout him out when we re-record this. This is actually something that we'll call the deleted scenes of the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, where Dan had brought up that even if it's CM Punk, you don't get to just come in and get a world title shot. So, Sergi, how long do you think AEW can hold off CM Punk from being in the world title picture? I mean, could they do it indefinitely, or is it just a matter of time before fans start to, really clamor for CM Punk as a world championship contender?
Absolutely, they could do it indefinitely. Think about Chris Jericho's babyface character right now. He is completely engrossed in a personal feud, and the world title is completely irrelevant to him at this time. If CM Punk is involved in something and does not personally care about the title, if he doesn't set that as a goal, if that's what fits his character,
yeah,
then there's no reason why that couldn't go as long as it should go.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and this is something that I really like that AEW does this, and I think it's something that they're kind of throwing back. In AEW, you don't necessarily need to be in a title feud. You don't have to be in the championship picture in order to be successful. So it's a throwback to, like the 80s where, Jake Roberts was one of the biggest stars in WWF, and he never held a title. Ted DiBiase, same thing. I bring it up a lot that it is possible to have a top guy, a main event guy, one of your biggest stars, just be involved in stuff that doesn't have to do with the title. Undertaker did it for 30 years. In fact, arguably the worst parts of Undertaker's career were when he was champion. So I think that AEW has shown that they're willing to do it with CM Punk. The Pinnacle Inner Circle, I think the lasting impact of that feud is that it can be a main event level feud without having a title. And I think that might be the case for CM Punk. But as far as it does go, if the goal is to put a championship on CM Punk at some point, Jacob, I know you love some fantasy booking, so if you could just kind of project a little bit for me what it would look like to see CM Punk as a champion at some point, when and where and how.
Gosh, I don't see him winning it for a while. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of people in AEW right now that sort of are in line and have been waiting for a while, and you could argue that CM Punk jumping the line could be a good story, especially for what we've already pitched about him coming in and basically trying to overshadow. But I think, and this is sort of maybe becoming a theme, if he does challenge like a Kenny Omega or like a Hangman Page, I think honestly, and I don't know, tell me if I'm off base here, having him sort of lose and seeing like, yeah, you're a very big name in wrestling, but a lot has changed since you were the top guy, and especially since you were the indie top guy. And so like everything out here has sort of not moved past you, but you need to become a little bit more before you win this title, because this title is so much more.
Yeah, you don't get to step in and just be the guy again after not being around for 10 years, essentially.
Yeah, and I think he should go on like a good run of just avoiding the title before that happens, because just a lot of people are going to get upset if it's just you bring him in, he has a few matches, he gets a title shot, and then he loses. People are going to go nuts about that. They're going to be like, "Oh, you've already effed up CM Punk. Good job, guys." But having him have like good storylines, at least one good long-term storyline before throwing him at the belt, and then having him ultimately lose, that I think that would give him enough time for everyone to see that he's in a good place, and that him losing is a part of that story.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And it's such a weird, I don't want to say weird, it's a massive pressure situation for AEW right now, knowing that you have CM Punk. I mean, it's one thing to get, it's one thing to get a guy, a huge name. It was one thing to get Jericho, Moxley, even Danielson. That's all one thing. But CM Punk is the guy that no one expected to return to wrestling. It wasn't a matter of injuries. It wasn't a matter of anything else. It was a matter of he didn't want to wrestle again, and everyone had just kind of accepted that CM Punk didn't want to wrestle again. And so for him to show back up in AEW, there's a lot of pressure on AEW to show exactly why CM Punk was willing to come back out of retirement and wrestle again when he was pretty clear that that's not something that he was interested in or wanted to do, even as recently as last year when he said the same thing, even when it came to AEW.
He was the white whale. He's literally been the white whale for about 7 years now, of just like who's going to catch him. And it seems like AEW has gotten that locked down.
Yes, it's a crazy time to be a wrestling fan for sure. Let's move on to talking about a guy who might potentially find himself in a title feud sooner rather than later, and that is Christian Cage. He teamed up with Jurassic Express to take on the Hardy Family Office, Private Party, and Angelico. This was a pretty not much happening match. I think Cage and Jurassic Express dominated. Big Offense outscored the Hardy Family Office 18-4 in a 4.5 minute match. And this, by the way, is including the fact that Christian left for half the match to go chase Matt Hardy. So it was basically a 3-on-2, and they still dominated that way. It's pretty much how it was going to go, in my opinion. There was no way that Hardy Family Office was winning this match. But certainly the babyfaces were better, and they proved to be better here. I think a bigger question, though, the fact that Christian, his first night in the company, or his first appearance on Dynamite, rather, he picked up the World Championship belt and held it and looked at it, and it certainly seemed as though his desire early on was to get a title shot. Now that Hangman can't get his shot anymore, it seems as though Christian might be up. So, Sergi, I mean, this match, obviously not a ton was happening, but in the wider story when it comes to Christian and even Jungle Boy, where do things stand for them right now with Hangman being out of the rankings?
Well, you've got Christian and you've got Jungle Boy. One of them has had a shot recently at the world title, but still hangs out very high in the rankings. The other one hasn't had that many matches yet, but is undefeated, and so is also high in the rankings. And they had Hangman above them as a reason why that they wouldn't be next. Not anymore. With Hangman gone, they're the top two, and that leads to some questions because there was some teasing of dissension between the two. Is this to add a little heat if it should end up being a triple threat match, or add a little heat to a number one contenders match? I think they could go either way. Right now, there's really nobody else besides either Christian after winning a number one contenders match against Jungle Boy, or Christian and Jungle Boy both in a triple threat match, that really makes sense to be Kenny Omega's next contender, unless Kenny Omega actually manages to duck defending it all under the concept that he pushed forward right before Hangman Page and the Dark Order challenged and said, hey, no, Page is someone you haven't beat yet, in the sense that he's going to claim, I assume, that that no one's worthy of getting a shot and he should get the night off. So it's a matter of, it's going to be one of those, I assume. I don't see any other options for the world title at this time.
You make a really good point about the potential of the world championship just not being defended on All Out, which would be interesting. I think it would be the first time that the world title has not been defended on a pay-per-view. And it's okay. I mean, there's no rule that says you have to defend the title every pay-per-view event. So if you can tell an effective story by doing that, then I think that's totally fine. What I do think is interesting, though, is the fact that, you know, Jungle Boy and Kenny Omega had this great match a few months ago at this point, and we all loved it. We all gushed about it. We made a video on it on the Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel, and so I would like to see it again. I would like to see Jungle Boy versus Kenny, but not now. I don't want to just see a rematch just because that match was great. Yeah, that match was great, but Christian and Kenny could have a great match as well. So, I think if you wanted to go in this direction where you have Christian versus Kenny, then you end up with, if Christian does turn heel on Jungle Boy, if it's not like a respect thing, you know, he just turns heel on him during that match, then you have a feud for Christian and Jungle Boy once All Out is over. And that's a big opportunity for Jungle Boy. Presumably, he would go over in that. And so you get the situation where Jungle Boy, your young up-and-coming star, is beating an established guy. So I feel like you're kind of killing two birds with one stone if you were to go in that direction. But, Jacob, let me ask you this. I mean, if you go into that, there's no possible way that Christian wins that match. And it also would be not the biggest match on the card. So it probably wouldn't be the main event, much like the three-way was not the main event at Double or Nothing. So how do you go about setting that up in a way where people will be interested in it when presumably, I mean, you could have CM Punk fighting on the card and you have other things going on, and also we kind of know who the winner of that's going to be. I mean, how does that story work?
So, first of all, I really like what Serge said about having a number one contenders match of Jungle Boy versus Christian Cage, because I was talking to Daisy of Pro Wrestling Musings at Bout Machines on Twitter earlier today. We were just chatting, and the topic of Christian came up, and I was sort of telling her about the possibility of him turning heel and turning back into the sort of douchey character that he was in Impact.
Kind of the whole Captain Charisma thing.
Yeah, and the role he's taken right now, sort of between when he debuted and when he's inevitably going to challenge for the championship, has been like the veteran that just wants to help out the young guys, and the young guy in this case is Jungle Boy. So if they were to have a number one contenders match, I could see it definitely going to where like it's a very friendly face versus face matchup, where like just right at the end when Christian Cage believes he's about to get beat, he does something heelish because he's the veteran, and he knows to do that, and then he just gets the win, and then that leads him to Kenny at All Out, and then once he loses to Kenny at All Out, that's when he then turns on Jungle Boy. That's sort of my idea for that. Yeah. But when you ask about like where would it go on the card, I definitely do think it would be semi-main to Punk and Darby, because Punk is going to be the biggest draw in the company, just period. The moment he enters, that's what he becomes. and Darby is a proven draw on TV. They put him in main events so many times, and he keeps getting them to 1 million viewers.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But
So-
this would be the first time, and that would be a great aspect of it too. It would be his first time getting to main event a pay-per-view, and I mean, what a
Yeah.
great thing to be able to have for, your homegrown talent.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
And I just want to, kind of take a step back and think about this. When AEW started, there were a lot of established guys that were beginning to occupy the upper echelons of the card, but they also mixed in at that time indie guys that they were not so well known, and the idea was AEW was gonna build them up. If we said at that time, 2.5 years ago, one of these guys is going to fight CM Punk in the main event of All Out in 2021, how far down the list would Darby Allin have been? I mean, I would never have expected that he'd be the one.
Honestly, he would have been high on my list.
Really?
Honestly, because he was the guy at Fyter Fest who went to a time limit draw with Cody of all people, and that was back when we were convinced that Cody was going to John Cena himself in this company, and he basically proved right off the bat that no, I'm going to add stock to these younger guys, and the person I'm going to add stock to the fastest is Darby Allin. So if you were to tell me one out of Jungle Boy, Darby Allin, Orange Cassidy, MJF, and Sammy Guevara, one of them's gonna face CM Punk in a main event, I probably would have guessed Darby Allin.
That's interesting. I think Darby Allin would have been fourth for me. I would have said, at that time, I mean, Jungle Boy was still new, but you could tell that people gravitated towards him. You could tell people liked him. It's the same thing with Orange Cassidy, although I don't know if I would have said that, a comedy wrestler would be in that situation, but he was certainly over at the time. And MJF, I was convinced then, and I'm convinced now, that he's going to be the biggest heel in the world for the next 10, 15 years. So I would have figured it would have been him. I might have even put Luchasaurus above Darby Allin just because of how over he was. But I say that just to say that Darby Allin deserves all the credit in the world for doing what he has done and taking the pressure of main eventing so many Dynamites with the TNT Championship and doing great things with that at a time where it's very difficult for anyone to do something great when you don't have fans to work off of. You don't have that energy. You have to bring that energy yourself. It's got to be incredibly difficult for anyone to excel, and yet Darby Allin has done that. So I think in the sense of rewarding him for what he's been able to do, I would like to see him main event All Out, with no title, barely any feud. I mean, we're talking about a feud that would be like 3 days old by the time All Out rolls around. But if anyone's going to do it, it would be Darby Allin and CM Punk. So I would say that I'll take that main event, and I'll just listen to the fans. That's what I'm here for when it comes to that.
Did you notice how we were talking about Christian and Jungle Boy, and then we started talking about Darby Allin and CM Punk again?
Yeah, we did not succeed in changing the subject. No. You're absolutely right about that, Jacob.
It just means that it is literally the most important thing that's going on in wrestling right now.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It would be, I think, the only match that would main event if it wasn't Punk and Allin would probably be Kenny and Hangman. I think that would be the only match whose importance would rival CM Punk's return.
And that match would have gotten the Chris Jericho and Triple H treatment going on after Hogan versus The Rock.
Yeah.
It would have been like just such an important match going on before the main event, and then you have the main event, and it's I don't actually remember if that match was good or not. It's been forever since I watched Triple H versus Chris Jericho. But even if you put on a good match, the crowd is going to be at least a little bit more dead than it would have been if you hadn't.
Yeah, well, and it's a similar situation. It's similar because you have a title match, and it was an important title feud that people were into, but you have these superstars, and in the case of in the case of CM Punk, he's as big of a story returning to the ring as Hogan at that time. So, yeah, I think we talked about this earlier. We talked about it with Dan in the earlier part of this, and what we were talking about is the idea that they just wanted to extend the story a little bit. That we all assumed it was going to be all out for Hangman to get his crowning achievement, but it might be now at Grand Slam. And they may be extending the story a little bit. And I think we might have just come across the reason why, because there'd almost be no way to win if you were Hangman. AEW wants Hangman. That's their crowning achievement, is the guy who fought for the world championship in the first match that it was contested in, lost, and then went all the way around to now be the most over babyface in AEW, maybe in the world right now. And they want his crowning achievement to be the biggest thing that happens. And there's no way you can do it. If it was a semi-main, then people would be going nuts, but then they'd have to calm down because CM Punk's about to come out. And if it was the main event, everyone would be dead because CM Punk just came out. So there's really no way to do it if you're going to have CM Punk on that card. So if that's the idea, I'm good with that, because it gives Hangman the moment that he deserves, given what he's been able to do. I know that there was some fear that they did it so that CM Punk himself can be the world champion, and we said it earlier, and I still don't think that's the case. I think it's more likely that they were just worried about the fans and how they'd react if they had both those things happen. So now, concluding that discussion of Christian Cage and Jurassic Express versus the Hardy Family Office, that is how that discussion started.
Good discussion about that.
Great. Yeah, great. No, great.
A little bit.
Great discussion about that. Let's talk about. We talked so much about Darby Allin. Let's talk about the current TNT champion, and I'm of course talking about Miro. He had another promo this week, and it featured one of my absolute favorite lines in any promo over the last year. The line about how he only needs two things in life, and that's a vengeful God and a double-jointed wife. And it's so dumb, because he's this big scary monster, and he's talking about the wrath of God and being God's favorite champion and everything, and then just every promo he slides in that he has a flexible wife. It's like, why is that a thing? Like, why is he? I don't know, but I really like it. It's just one of the quirks of his character. I think his reign has been really good, and he's going to go up against Lee Johnson for the TNT championship at Homecoming. So, I mean, I like Miro as a champion, and I'm excited to see this match go down. Jacob, when you see promos like this from Miro, what kind of story do you want to see him in, where he can where there's more than just promos to make us laugh or sell us on his character? What kind of story should there be for Miro?
Every time I watch a Miro promo, it's always him basically like talking up a guy that he respects, kind of, but like obviously God's wrath is going to burn everyone. I want someone to make him mad. I want someone to legitimately make him angry. Because right now it's just him going against younger guys who can job to him really easily and make him look real good, and I love that. But he's doing it out of a place of like almost mercy. I want the pretense of mercy to be gone at some point, and him to just be like, "No, you effed up. I'm going to kill you."
I mean, I would not say no to that. But is there anyone who could believably survive an assault like that from Miro? I mean, like, they're putting him over as this crazy monster when he has half of his character is like a comedy thing. Not really comedy, but half of his character is funny. Who do they have that can believably withstand that with a character who's entirely just vicious the way that you're describing?
I'd love to see them circle back to Orange Cassidy. There's still a lot of unfinished business from that feud. He never directly pinned Cassidy, I don't think, and Cassidy never directly beat him, but he was always the thorn in his side in that feud. The problem in that feud was never Chuck Taylor. Miro always handily beat up Chuck Taylor in every situation, but every time Orange got in the ring with him, that was the guy he had trouble with. and that is the perfect guy. Orange Cassidy is the perfect character to legitimately piss off Miro.
I honestly thought that Chuck Taylor might lose the one match that had the stipulation on it and stay with the Butler Charles character. I thought he was having fun with it. It was an interesting little digression.
Yeah, I agree. Well, he sold it really well, so credit to him. But I agree with you in the sense that Orange Cassidy, if you remember, he had a mini feud with Pac way back at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. They had a match at Revolution 2020, which is a match that I really, really enjoyed. That was a sleeper match for me on that card. And the whole feud was that Pac was getting progressively more angry at Orange Cassidy, and he didn't even do anything. And that was before he even spoke in AEW. So he did it there, and I thought the end match was great. He did it to Jericho, where that was the whole feud, that he was making Jericho more and more pissed off. And then we got the Mimosa Mayhem match, which I also thought was pretty good. So I think Orange Cassidy, is just really good in feuds where that's what he's asked to do. So putting him against Miro will be really interesting. It'll just be interesting that, Miro tends to have short matches, and doing it against a guy like Orange Cassidy, it'll be interesting to see how they would structure a match where Orange Cassidy is asked to go longer against Miro than normal. So I don't know. That's more speculative. What I will say is, on the topic of Lee Johnson, this to me is similar to Miro's match with Dante Martin a few months ago. That was a match that I also enjoyed, even for what it was, which was a pretty short, kind of a squash match, really. But it was competitive, and it really gave Martin a chance to show his own athleticism, and that to me kind of feels like what this might be for Lee Johnson, that it might be an opportunity for him to kind of show out a little bit, because he's a guy that I think AEW does believe in a little bit, at least a little bit. It's hard to say with a guy like Lee Johnson, but it does feel like AEW might believe in him. I don't know.
He was the first signing of the Nightmare Factory, the first official signing of the Nightmare family, I guess. He was sort of the guy that was on Dark, and then he was the guy that they were like, he's going to be with Cody. We're putting him with Cody. That's where we think he is in this pecking order, that we want him next to Cody, and we want him next to Dustin, and we want him in that sort of mix with those guys, because we have that, we have the faith in him that he's going to eventually be something great.
Yeah. Well, I think he has the ability to do that. I think he's a great athlete, and his selling is what has stood out to me when we've seen him in Dynamite matches, and not just squashes, but where he's actually been a little bit competitive. I really like the way he sells. So he's a good babyface seller. So that's going to really help him against someone like Miro. So that's a match I'm excited for. We'll talk a little bit about the rest of the homecoming card, because there is a lot of stuff when it comes to that, and I'm sure that we'll be able to talk a little bit more about what we might see as we kind of wind down from these 4 just insane shows in a row. But before we do that, we got to get to Thunder Rosa versus Julia Hart. This was a squash match. This is as squash as you get. Usually Craig doesn't do stats for matches like this. It went just over 4 minutes, and it was entirely one-sided. But in this case, he actually did. So it was cool to see the numbers on this, because it's such an interesting look at how squash matches can really work. Thunder Rosa gets 92% of the offense. The big offense, she leads 8-0, almost a minute of submission time in a 4-minute match. She was entirely dominant. It's just cool to see it mapped out exactly how dominant she was and how she went about it. This was pretty much a nothing match, but it certainly, I think, served to remind everyone that Thunder Rosa, first of all, is now contracted to AEW, and second of all, that she's a really good wrestler, and she's over. People like her. So, I mean, it seems like maybe Thunder Rosa's moving back into a potential challenge to Britt Baker for the championship. So, I mean, I'll I'll ask it straight up because there's not a ton to talk about with this particular match. So, Sergi, is that something you would want to see, Rosa and Baker for the title at this point?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Thunder Rosa and Britt Baker have fantastic chemistry. Thunder Rosa is like Nyla Rose, Baker's first challenger, is one of the few people who can claim a win over Britt Baker. Even though her win is not in the record books, it's still, everyone saw it. And when I say everyone saw it, it's like one of the most high-profile matches in the women's division, despite the fact that it was a lights-out match and not on the official record books. One of the most high-profile, one of the best-remembered matches, best-reviewed matches of the whole year. Of any promotion, really.
Yeah.
It's just like a really huge match, and she came out the winner. So she has this major win, even though it's not on the record books, over the current champion. So she's an obvious contender, and they have fantastic chemistry, and it'll be a great match. The question is, where do you go with it? I know that when we first recorded this, you spoke a little bit about how maybe Britt Baker's champion just isn't working because of the reactions of the fans not matching the character. Now, I think that remains to be seen, but it is a consideration. Maybe it's time to, change horses. And of course, Thunder Rosa would be the perfect person for that. That's one of the main reasons why they might put it off, is because they might not be ready for Thunder Rosa to lose one. But on the other hand, she already has, even though it's not in the record books, a win over Britt. So losing one to her, first off, Britt is considered, so high level within her division that a loss to her isn't that harmful anyway, and it would only make them even, basically. So it wouldn't be that harmful, I wouldn't think. So I'd love to see it. I think it's the most likely thing because I don't see any other obvious contenders, and they haven't been giving the women's division enough time to build anyone up on Dynamite, and you can't build someone up for a Britt Baker match on Dark.
Yeah,
they haven't really had a chance to build anybody up. Thunder Rosa has at least the advantage of, we all know she beat Britt Baker.
Right.
Until Yuka Sakazaki went back to Japan, there was always the possibility of, well, we remember that Yuka Sakazaki a year or so ago had that one win, and then Britt attacked her after, so that would have been a possibility.
Yep.
But with her gone, I don't see who else it could be.
Yeah. So to your point, what I was talking about, if you've been listening to the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast at all over the last couple months since Baker became the champion, what I've said is AEW did the absolute right thing. They put the belt on their biggest star, which Britt Baker undoubtedly is. She's among the top stars in the company, and I think there's a short list that would include Hangman and very few other people who would be above Britt Baker at this point in terms of star power and in terms of overness. But I think the mistake that AEW made was that they didn't realize exactly what that reaction was going to be to Britt Baker. I think that AEW really thought that there were going to be like some cheers, but then also some boos, kind of that thing that we've come to expect for heels, that people would cheer them ironically, or the kind of the smark thing that people do. I think that's what AEW expected, but that's not what they got. They got essentially a babyface reaction to Britt Baker entirely. I mean, up to the point where when Baker was in like the yay boo spot, Baker was the one being cheered, and it's like, I think that was an issue for AEW, because I think they're like, what the hell do we do with this? We can't put a babyface against her because the babyface is going to get booed, or at least not going to get cheered. We can't put a heel against her because Britt Baker's a heel, so it won't necessarily work. So I think AEW miscalculated in that regard. So to your point, Sergi, I think you could, if AEW decides, Britt Baker was the right person, but not at the right time for what we have, We need to cut our losses at this point and give it to Thunder Rosa. Because with Thunder Rosa, we know what we're getting. She is a babyface. She gets cheered like a babyface. She acts like a babyface. Everything about her is a babyface wrestler. And so they might want to just put it on her, because I think AEW is in a position where with Britt as champion, they could start to build up stars to be on her level and use her to build them. But it's hard to do that when you can't tell an effective story because the crowd isn't doing what you thought they'd do. So with Thunder Rosa, you can build up new people because you can absolutely anticipate what the crowd's going to do with Rosa as champion. So it would suck because I think I really like Britt as champion. The fans love Britt as champion. I think she deserves all the credit in the world for reinventing her own character to be at the point where she's now the most popular woman in AEW. But for the sake of the long-term health of the women's division, I could see if AEW decided to put the title on Thunder Rosa at this point. Jacob, where do you come down on that?
So I think so. Much like with the men and the World Championship, it was very obvious the first 4 people who are going to hold the men's World Championship. It was Jericho, then it was Moxley, now it's Kenny, and now everyone knows that it's going to be Hangman. I feel like after Shida won it, and they got in Thunder Rosa, and they the feud with Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa just sparked, and it just went off, and it got super hot. I think they realized they had their next 2 women's champions lined up. So I do think that eventually that Thunder Rosa will be taking the belt off of Britt Baker. I don't know if whenever they come back around to it, they will be referencing the fact that there was the lights out match where she did technically win. I don't know if that's going to put her in the front of the line right now because it was lights out. So I think they're going to use the fact that it was lights out to push it out a little bit, because I think Britt Baker does deserve a run. And I know the crowd reaction she's getting, as she's a heel, but she's not getting treated like a heel at all in the slightest. I feel like they've been trying to walk a line between tweener and heel, which is really, she's like the northwest of wrestling alignments right now. And it's been interesting to watch. It hasn't soured the character for me that she's getting treated like a huge babyface, even though she's a heel, because she's a great character herself, and the fans just attach to that. And even if she's acting like a heel, the fact that the fans attach to it still, it almost makes the character better for me, at least, hearing everyone react to her so strongly, because it's that's someone that everyone wants to see, and so I too want to see her because I want to see everyone in the crowd be really happy. And I don't think they should take it off her early because of the reaction she's getting, because I like the reaction she's getting, and I think she can have a lot of good matches before Thunder Rosa comes up in the queue.
Yeah, I agree with you on that sense. You've heard me say this before if you listen to the podcast. The heelish nature of Britt Baker is the feature, not the bug. That's what people like about her. So I've always said that I don't think there's a reason why you couldn't book a heel against Britt Baker and have that work. The problem is, if you do it, then you're going to, Baker has to be basically the de facto babyface if you do that. And she was against Nyla Rose. And Nyla is great at just being a killer heel who is bigger and stronger than everyone. And she did it to Baker, and she powerbombed her through a table and did all this stuff. But it didn't get the reaction. It didn't get that fan reaction that we were hoping for. And so the story kind of felt disjointed a lot of the time. So it's hard to say. Was that because of Nyla Rose? Do people just not want to see her in the championship picture at this point? Or is that just because you can't work with a character like this against a heel? I mean, I don't know. That's an open question. I think it could be either one.
Well, let me pitch this to you, and it's not necessarily an answer to the question, but I would say that Thunder Rosa right now is also, maybe not as hot as Britt Baker, but she's still white hot comparatively to everything else in wrestling right now. So maybe instead of instead of thinking of it like who's going to get cheered and who's going to get booed here, maybe we think of it as if we get that match, we're definitely going to get chance of Thunder Rosa DMD.
Yep.
Just like imagine that stare down.
Worst case scenario for those two, at least, is the fan reaction of a babyface versus babyface match. They're not going to turn on Thunder Rosa for Britt Baker's sake, no matter how much they love her, unless they did it in Pittsburgh, which they definitely should not do. Yeah, don't do that match in Pittsburgh. But other than that, all you're really going to get is competing chance, and that's a great atmosphere for a high profile.
That's a great problem to have.
Exactly.
That's absolutely right. Well, yes, it is finally that time. Let's talk about the main event. I can't believe that this match was put on TV. I can't, like, it's hard to come up with enough superlatives for how unlikely it was, like, 6 months or a year ago to say Nick Gage will be main eventing an AEW show on TNT that was watched by 1 million people. Like, it's hard to put that into perspective, and yet that's where we ended up. Nick Gage and Chris Jericho in a no rules match, and I mean, I thought this match was great. I think, and there are people at PWM who don't like death matches. I've seen lots of people who say this, have this same critique. I read Bleach Report's review every week just to refresh myself on what happened. Their writer for the review this week gave it a D, which is the lowest that I've ever seen a match for AEW in a long time. And he said specifically it was because he doesn't like death matches. So for some people it doesn't work. But for me, I thought this match was really, really good. It was really compelling. It was really emotional. And even though I was pretty sure Jericho was going to win, there were times where I was like, I don't know. It's not looking good right now for Jericho. So I really enjoyed every bit of this. Sergi, what did you think about this match? Did it work for you, even though it has been divisive for a lot of people?
Absolutely. I think you made a lot of great points. That it was a way. MJF's storyline that he is in right now, that he basically has been pushing forward with the 5 labors of Jericho, is one that seemed really paint by numbers. Like, this is not creative. We just did the same dang thing with Cody, basically. Jericho did the same sort of thing with Moxley. Of course, you're not going to convince me that Jericho's not going to win. And the more you try to make it unlikely or try to make it convincing that he's not going to win, you just know that he's going to win, but it's just going to be unrealistic. And they completely avoided all of those problems, all those pitfalls. That bringing in Nick Gage allowed them to give you a genuine sense of peril, but also made it credible that the wily veteran could find a way to win over this guy who's never had a match on this level, who's also incredibly dangerous and is credible at being very, very dangerous and a real threat to him, but also believable that he's going to have holes in his game because he's never competed at anything like this kind of level. It's amazing, like you were saying about seeing 1 million people on TNT watching a match like this. You're looking at a 50-year-old man doing spots like that. 50-year-old man who's been on television for 25 years now, off and on, mostly on. And then you have a guy who's never been on television before in his life. And 1 million people watching them do deathmatch spots that have never been broadcast on this level at all. It's just absolute, like, what timeline is this kind of stuff.
It's amazing. like Nick Gage could go a year or more without having 1 million people watch his stuff. I mean, combined across every match he does, and in one night there's 1 million people watching Nick Gage. And what they got was that was Nick Gage. Like they didn't get like a pared back version of him. They got the MDK thing. They got they got the pizza cutter, they got the light tubes, they got the pane of glass as a table across the chairs. Like they got Nick Gage, and that was, I think, very enticing to anyone in the world who works in the indies, because this isn't the first time that we've seen this. You got authentic Nick Gage, you got authentic Jeff Cobb when he came into AEW, you got authentic Warhorse when he came into AEW to face Cody for the TNT title. I think if you are an indie wrestler, you're looking at this and going, look, I want to do a day at AEW. I mean, like, the money's probably pretty good, and you get to be yourself in front of this massive audience, and they're not going to try to change who you are just to fit the story. They're changing the story to fit who you are, like Nick Gage in this scenario, and another guy that we're about to talk about in 1 second. So I think it's a very enticing opportunity for anyone who wants to come into AEW to be a part of something like this. And from AEW's perspective, they could use anyone on earth for something like this, because they've proven that they're a good place to be, to come to just do a night, which goes along with kind of the idea that AEW is almost like this. It's like an indie that grew up, because they kind of treat themselves like an indie. Like, people come in and they have their own stories and their own characters and their own personalities, and they just do it for a night and then they leave, and it's okay, and people like that, and I think AEW encourages that. Jacob, let me get
a lot more options. It gives them so many more options where, we've already done all the combinations of the characters that work, but we can plug in people from wherever and have these extra options.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. So, Jacob, let me get your perspective on this. Death matches don't work for everyone, and this one, they held very little back from what you would expect a death match to be. I mean, this was pretty, it's not the wildest, but it's probably the most brutal match that's ever been televised, in my opinion, just in terms of the weapons that were used. I don't know if this has ever been touched on cable TV before. So, was this your thing? Did you like this?
I do really enjoy death matches. It's so much more of a spectacle than just regular wrestling, and it's not something that, like, I watch every day. But when it's on and they're doing it and they're putting their bodies on the line like this, it's just, there's something so much more to it than just wrestling. It's almost like sword swallowers or walking on glass or, like, high acrobatics without a net. It's the general peril of it all that you're like, why are they doing this to themselves for my entertainment? There's something about it that just watching it makes it so worth it. And like you said, this was probably the most violent match ever on, like, a weekly TV show. Like, obviously, pay-per-views, we've gotten Moxley versus Omega, and they had a glass spot, which was very, very obviously sugar glass. But I don't think we've ever properly seen light tubes and a pane of glass on any nationally televised program ever.
Certainly not light tubes. I mean, that will be new to hundreds of thousands of people, thinking, like, what the hell? Like, why did they just have a fluorescent light in the ring?
I don't know if we've seen light tubes. I don't know if we've seen the pane of glass spot. I don't know if we've seen pizza cutter. The pizza cutter that was so controversial in this match. Yeah, it's just insane watching a match at that level on TV. And obviously, and we'll get into this more later, I wrote the 5 directions that AEW can take the labors of Chris Jericho on ProWrestlingMusings.com. Check it out. And I had written that article before Nick Gage was announced. And when he was announced, the basis of the article is me like taking threads and trying to like plug them into where they're gonna go eventually, and Nick Gage was just such a surprise. Like, it doesn't play into any story they're telling, but it just works almost the best out of anyone. Like, they could have easily slotted Luther into this spot. Just think of that for a second. If they wanted Chris Jericho to have a death match with like a person they already had, they have Luther. They have deathmatch Luther. But they're like, no, we're gonna get a name that's been in the wrestling sphere like prominently since Dark Side of the Ring. We're gonna get him in, and we're gonna have a main event our show, and we're just gonna let him do what he does. And Nick Gage, he got the full Nick Gage back. He had Justin Roberts saying MDK all day and calling him Nick friggin' Gage. It was so insane to watch. And the match was just bloody violent. Last week I was scared when Chris Jericho did a normal Hurricane Rana off the top rope, and now add glass. I was terrified.
I was like, if we're ever gonna see a career end on an episode of Dynamite, that would have been the one. Like, Jericho I can't believe he did that.
Like, during the Shawn Spears match, he hit the back of his head on the turnbuckle. I was like, the back of his head is hitting that glass. I was so convinced of it. But no, that was just beautiful, and he hit him with the bundle of light tubes at the end and the Judas effect, which, again, in my conversation with Daisy earlier today, we were joking about how it just looks like a drunk old guy in the bar stumbling backwards and accidentally knocking into someone. But like, it's a protected move, so you gotta.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's one of the most protected moves in AEW right now. So,
and it just looks kind of stupid. So yeah,
it's
I'm
funny
not with
that's
you on
the
that.
one.
I mean, that's
I'm not
fair.
with you on that.
I like it when
I think it looks
hits
pretty
well.
vicious.
I like it when he hits it well. I don't think he particularly hit it well in this match. I feel like he hit him with like the shoulder blade in this match in particular, but yeah.
I think can we all agree that the best Judas Effect Jericho ever delivered was to the Jaguars mascot? Can we just agree on that? That is Judas Effect number one. I actually can't get over in my head that Nick Gage was in this match. I mean, full disclosure, we've already went through this once. Like, Sergi, Dan, and I talked about this on the part of the podcast that you're never going to get to listen to, the deleted scenes of PWM. So we've already talked about this once. Now we're talking about it again, and we talked about it the night of, and I've talked about it with every single person I know who watches wrestling, and I still can't get over the fact that Nick Gage was on AEW Dynamite. Like, of all the ridiculous Forbidden Door stuff that they're doing and casually announcing Tanahashi and all this other stuff they've done, Nick Gage is the one guy that has shocked me more than anyone else. Just the fact that he was given a match on AEW Dynamite, and the fact that it was with a 50-year-old. I mean, one thing if they brought Nick Gage in to do a death match with like Darby Allin or something, who's an actual death match wrestler, okay, fine. At least he knows what he's doing. But like, Jericho's 50.
In the main event.
And exactly. I mean, I had a friend who said the only reason it's the main event is because you can't have a Nick Gage match before 9:30 Eastern. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, actually, that's fair. But I can't believe. And you know what? I can't have any more respect for Chris Jericho for doing this. I mean, there's no it's not like this was expected. It's not like if this didn't happen, everyone would be like, well, yeah, but where was Nick Gage doing a death match? Like, that never would have even entered anyone's minds when it came to the 5 labors of Jericho, and yet he agreed to do this, and agreed to take a pizza cutter to the face and light tubes to the head and stuff. Like, he agreed to do a whole death match. And they didn't strip anything away. And it's just like, I can't believe that he did that. I still can't process it. I'm gonna be on my deathbed and being like, God, I remember when Nick Gage had a death match with Chris Jericho. Like, I can't even process this.
Regarding the main event thing, I remember as I was watching it, and the 10-man ended up being the opener, and I was just going along like, wait, what's the main event? Nick Gage versus Jericho sounded interesting, but it didn't sound like the top of this stacked show until you watched it. And it's like, oh yeah, no, nothing could have followed that.
Yeah.
Other than the
the same
announcement,
thing.
which of course was a great follow-up.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is the silver lining of us having to redo this whole podcast, because we talked about it on the part that you're never going to get to hear on the deleted scenes, but now you get to hear from the man himself. So at the end of the night, MJF comes out onto the microphone and references a clip of Jericho saying that he used to wrestle Juventud Guerrera on Nitro in 95, and MJF didn't know who Juventud was, and so Jericho said look him up, and MJF said I did look him up, so next match you're gonna have to fight Juventud Guerrera. And none other than Jacob from Pro Wrestling Musings called this. He said that this was going to happen, and we all made fun of him for it, and now Juventud Guerrera is wrestling on AEW Dynamite, wrestling Chris Jericho. So Jacob, I'm gonna cede the floor here to you. How did you know that this was going to happen, and what are you expecting from this match?
It's the threads, man. It's the storyline threads. It's what I do. I pick up on those notes. I remember. It's all about remembering. Because I was writing that article, and again, it's all about taking just these little details that they've pointed out, and just like, what could this grow into? What could the seed of context grow into? And I'm so happy that they even threw up the clip of that scene, because when I was writing the article, I looked up that exact clip to get the quote of who the hell is Hoovy, and I was like, when I was writing it, I was like, this would be insane if this actually happened. But like, I was so confident in it because it's just like, it happened. And I asked the group chat, the Pro Wrestling Musings group chat, if Hoovy was retired, because I didn't know.
I remember that.
and everyone was like,
the most random question I've ever seen in that group chat.
You guys didn't even know I was doing an article at the time.
I just thought you were curious. I thought you woke up. I thought you were like watching an old rerun of Nitro, and you were like, "Man, does Hoovy still wrestle?"
But no, it's just like I popped so hard when he started referring to it, and like my roommate was in the room and we were watching it together, and I just started going like, "It's happening! It's happening! It's happening! I did it! I predicted something
like the
correctly."
Michael Scott gif.
Yeah, exactly. Like, more than CM Punk coming out, it was just the fact that I got something right. If you need any promotion, to go read my 5 Directions articles. Don't pay attention to the one I wrote about the Elite and the Dark Order. I got a lot of stuff wrong on that. But this one, I am correct.
You know what?
I got 1 point.
What I will say is everyone got stuff wrong about the Elite, but I can almost guarantee that no one else predicted Juventud Guerrera would wrestle Chris Jericho as part of the 5 Labors. I can almost guarantee that. So every subsequent 5 things, just remember, the weirdest thing that you see of those 5, that's probably going to be the one that AEW ends up going with. So just every 5 things, just read them. You never know what kind of weird stuff might pop up in there.
Just remember that I do have a percentage. There's a percentage of correct that you can now go into 5 Directions articles knowing that, hey, this guy gets a certain percent of things correct.
Exactly. And that percentage includes correctly calling Juventud Guerrera having a Dynamite match in 2021. So, Sergi, now that we've given Jacob his due for what he deserves for picking the absolute most random match anyone could have ever correctly predicted, now I have to ask you about how this match is actually going to go. Fans are obviously into Hoovy. When MJF, like, as soon as he screamed the juice, everyone started going nuts. So it's a crazy moment. He and Jericho have a lot of history. And so certainly the fanfare is there, but Juventud, if you look on Cage Match, Juventud's had, I think, 2 matches since the pandemic began. So we're talking like 18 months, and he's had about 2 matches. So it's hard to say exactly who we're going to see coming into this match. So what do you expect from this?
I think that there's 2 ways that they can go. Either they are going to genuinely try to turn back the clock and like let's do the best that we can as 50-year-olds, give the kind of performance we gave when we were 25 and working for WCW. Let's show them what cruiserweights can do. And I'm not gonna give that a high percentage because I don't know if it's possible. But I don't know that I would have called this past Wednesday's main event with Jericho as being something that would work as well as it did. So I'm not going to say it can't happen either. So that's one possibility. Another possibility would be to instead contrast, like, hey, when we fought, when we were enemies, we were kids and we relied on our speed. But now we're old and savvy, and we're going to rely on our skill and our cunning. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a very much a who can out a grizzled veteran the other.
That's a good way to think about it. You know, if you go back, Hoovy had a couple matches with, I think, Chavo Guerrero in WCW, and he actually did like some chain wrestling. There was, it wasn't just, you know, Hoovy flying all over the place. It was actually, you know, him showing more, I guess, more traditional lucha libre stuff, much, you know, very quick transitions and lots of reversals and counters and things like that. So I think it's entirely possible that he might, you know, be able to do that same thing against Jericho. Full disclosure, I have not seen a Juventud Guerrera match since he was in WCW. I mean, I wasn't alive for that, but going back and watching WCW, that's the last time I've ever seen Juventud actually, you know, compete in a ring. So I don't know, maybe he's like just this incredible amateur wrestler now. I don't know. Like, I'm not going to put anything past what this match could be because of exactly what you said. I would have never believed that Jericho would be in an actual death match against the most famous deathmatch wrestler in today's wrestling, and yet here we are. So I don't know. I could say that in 100 years, I don't expect Jericho and Juventud Guerrera to turn back the clock and have a WCW, you know, 1996 cruiserweight match, but I don't know. Could happen. It's apparently stranger things have happened in AEW. So, Jacob, you're the one that predicted this match. Did you give any thought about what the match would actually be like?
So here's the thing. I predicted the match correctly. I don't think I've ever watched a full Hoovy match. Like I said in the article that I believe as veterans they're still going to be able to like at least conceptualize a good match, and I believe that they're both skilled enough. I have watched clips of his work on the indie scene recently, and he still seems to be able to move around fairly well. So I think that whatever they put together will be within what they're physically capable of doing, and I think it'll be at least, if not great, at least good, like upper good.
Even given their age, it seems like it would be hard for these two to have a bad match. The only way they could do it is if they really tried to overextend themselves. But certainly in the case of Jericho, I think he knows his own limitations here. So it seems like it would be very hard for these two guys to have a bad match. I think the floor is good, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but I don't know.
Well, and the thing is, regarding what you just said, Chris Jericho does generally know his limitations, but he also has a tendency to sometimes go, you know what, I'm going to prove you all wrong because you've gotten the idea that I can't pull off a lion salt anymore. You know, I blew it that one time, but here I'm going to do a perfect one just to show you I still can. And, you know?
When Jericho, when he hits that first triangle drop kick against Hoovy, that's when I know that, you know, Jericho's in that mindset where he's like, he's in the I'm gonna prove everyone wrong, I still got it mindset. That's when that happens. So, and that he can still do. He did a triangle drop kick like a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken. So I know he can still do that, and obviously he can still do the lion salt and all, you know, all the typical Jericho stuff. The thing about Jericho is that obviously he was a great athlete when he was young, but he wasn't like, he wasn't Hoovy. He wasn't Rey Mysterio. He wasn't like bouncing all over the place. He was just very quick. And so it's not like he needs to be doing all kinds of springboards and top rope maneuvers and things like that. He can dial up that quickness in a smart way. As long as he and Hoovy can work together on that, they can do it in a smart way that they can sort of turn back the clock and give us that style of match. Which,
Jericho.
I was going to say, if they even get close, people are going to be impressed that they're even approaching that level.
Jericho, in a lot of ways, was the CM Punk of his time, in the sense that he had just enough athleticism and physicality to keep up with the very best athletes, but so good at the character side that he brought something extra to the table to be his reason for being on those guys' level.
That's a great comparison, in my opinion, and I think in the same way that no one is questioning can CM Punk have good matches against people in AEW, I don't think people should be questioning whether or not Chris Jericho can have good matches even against Juventud Guerrera, who is now the most unpredictable Jericho's most unpredictable match since like a few nights ago when he fought Nick Gage. Did we mention that Nick Gage was on AEW Dynamite
right
in 2021? I just want to remind everyone that yes, that did actually happen. Let's talk real fast before we get out of here. Let's talk about AEW Homecoming. It's going to be their last show in Daly's Place for a while, and it seems that they're taking a different tact for this. Coming into Fight for the Fallen, they had lots of matches that were announced and segments and big events that were going on, like the 10-man tag and Nick Gage. Did we mention Nick Gage was on AEW Dynamite? Like they had all this, and for Homecoming, they're not going so much into that. It's fewer matches and more. I guess they're opening the door for more time for a lot of these matches that we're seeing. So we've got Cody Rhodes and Malachi Black. Malachi Black is making his debut in AEW. We have Jericho versus Guerrero, like we were talking about. Miro versus Johnson. We have the Bunny versus Layla Hirsch, which is an interesting prospect on paper. That's a number one contenders match for the NWA Women's World Championship. So it seems like they're setting up for a lot of these matches to have time and to really get into it. More so, and time in an individual sense, more than it means something else than when we say we need time for the 10-man tag, because there's 10 people, so you need everyone to get their stuff in. Having that amount of time for an individual match is a different matter. So it seems like that's what they're kind of setting up for. So, Sergi, you are our resident preview specialist. Your Styles Make Fights series previews your matches that you're looking forward to on the following week of each Dynamite. And on this one, unfortunately, you won't be able to do a lot of previewing about Malachi Black and Cody Rhodes, because Malachi Black hasn't had a match in AEW, but certainly you've been able to do stuff about the Bunny and Layla Hirsch, and I know that that's one you're looking forward to. So what about that match intrigues you at Homecoming?
There's several things that work into it. First, it's an important match for Layla Hirsch, just because she's reached a certain point in her development. It's a lot like Lee Johnson is at a pretty similar point, actually, and they're both the difference is, of course, that Layla Hirsch is getting someone that's credible for her to beat, not so much with poor Lee Johnson. But they're both at the point where they spent the earlier part of their career basically being enhancement talent or a jobber to the stars for people who they didn't really have much of a chance against. Then they've moved on more recently to having a lot of dark matches against just pure enhancement talent. They build up these wins, but wins against competitors who don't have any wins themselves, so they're not as meaningful of wins. Now, for Bunny, this presuming that she's able to beat, Layla Hirsch, presuming she's able to beat the Bunny, we would be talking about her first win over a competitor who is not winless themselves. And that's a big step for her. It's like a graduation. And then on top of that, it's a number one contenders match. And a number one contenders match, not just for a title at home, but a number one contenders match that would mean being a part of a sort of historic all women's first non-WWE all women's pay-per-view. Something along the lines of that, the NWA Empower, and having the chance to be like the like Kenny Omega or like Serena Deeb, be someone who has brought gold home from outside the company. So those are definitely some big parts of it. And then the other thing that I'm interested in is seeing how she fights. She has a really distinct style that I really enjoy. She is very technical.
Hirsch, you mean?
But if you look, say again.
Hirsch.
Yes, Layla Hirsch. Yes, I'm referring to Layla Hirsch. Very technical. I really enjoy that style. She has a crispness and also just a mystique about her of just this very it's her nickname, legit. This someone who really has the skills, and even if she hasn't been able to beat a lot of people, like she's had losses against the Thunder Rosa, against Britt Baker, people like that, but she's never been. I mean, compare it to Lee Johnson. When Lee Johnson was losing to people, when he was early in his career losing to people, he was purely selling. All he was there for is to sell. He didn't get a single move in, maybe a reversal at the most. Layla Hirsch, from debut on, even though she wasn't able to beat the people who were above her on the pecking order, she was never easy to beat herself. She's I think really someone to watch as someone who, if they continue on with Britt Baker as a heel, they don't turn her or have her drop the title to Thunder Rosa or something, she could be a challenger for Britt very soon. Arthur Ashe soon, potentially. I just really enjoy her work. And it's really interesting to look at how she approaches matches a little differently, whether she's whether she's punching up or punching down, so to speak. She has a very the big difference is in high flying moves versus grapples, throws, and suplexes. When she is working with enhancement talents, she uses a lot more throws and grapples, and a lot less of the high-flying moves. And then it switches around to the opposite. She works a lot more with the aerial moves when she is working with someone who is a higher-level competitor, and less suplexes, less throws.
Interesting. I would almost have thought it would have been the reverse, but this is why I really like Styles Make Fights, because you get to see how varied stylistically so many of these wrestlers in AEW are, and it's not something that you really get unless you take a deep dive into the numbers the way that you have. So definitely, first of all, check out Styles Make Fights. If you don't read that, definitely do that. It's one of my favorites. And I am excited for that match. I'm a fan of Layla Hirsch, so I would like to see her get some real time to showcase what she's about, and also be a bigger part of that women's division going forward. I think that would be cool to see, just because she has a much different look and style than a lot of other women in AEW. So she's just distinctive in that sense, and also she's fun to like. She's fun to root for, in my opinion. Obviously, the match that everyone is probably most looking forward to at this point is Cody Rhodes versus Malachi Black. Now this is something that unfortunately Sergi can't really talk much about because we don't have numbers for Malachi Black. But it's still, to me, I think it's going to be a great match. I think these are two world-class wrestlers. So Jacob, when you look at this, when you look at Cody versus Black, what do you expect to see from this? I mean, is this going to be a great match, or is this more of like a sort of a spectacle for Malachi Black's first AEW match?
Well, I'm very happy that you passed this to me, because where Sergi can't analyze the hard data and the styles on this, my next 5 Directions article is on Malachi Black versus Cody Rhodes. I've enlisted the help of Daisy, our resident Malachi Black expert, and we spent about an hour, 2 hours this morning just going through different stuff that Aleister Black, Tommy End has done throughout his career, as well as we went back and watched the video that he first released when he was about to go to AEW, when he was in the mental asylum. We went back and watched that for clues, and we came up with our 5 directions. The match itself. Shut up. Sorry, my dog did not like my cat. The match itself is going to be good as long as Cody Rhodes doesn't win. That's where we're at right now. There is one way they can mess it up, and it's just there's no way they can do that. So I don't think there's any way they make this bad. Whether it's going to be a long match that main events the show and it ends with Malachi Black winning, or if it's just spoilers for the article, just one kick and he wins, like he's known to do in his early days in NXT, that will also be just such this impactful moment in AEW that it'll be, everyone will be buzzing about it for the next week.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny that you say that, because on the deleted scenes, Dan basically said the exact same thing, almost word for word, that he said, this could be a long, drawn-out match. It could be, one black mass or whatever he calls it. Hopefully it's still a black mass. I love that name. And you're done. And so obviously, you talk about the comparisons to Brody Lee, who absolutely destroyed Cody in like 2 minutes, and it was a huge, impactful moment when he did it. So it would be kind of interesting that Cody, who constantly gets this criticism about, how he's Triple H and he's got the golden shovel and he's doing all this stuff. It would be funny if he's the guy that people squash when they're trying to become, monsters in AEW. Either way, I think, and this is something that surely, will come out in your 5 Directions article, because it's something that Daisy and I have talked about, because I'm a big Tommy End fan as well. What he sort of lost in NXT, I don't want to say lost, but just changed his style a little bit. What you forget about Tommy End in the Indies, or may not know if you never watched him, is that he was a different style in the Indies. He was very strong style inspired. He has a background in kickboxing, so he used that to an even greater degree than he did even in NXT. And he's a terrific athlete, and he used that in the Indies as well. I mean, in NXT, he was known for that beautiful acai moonsault that he would pull out, and it was great, and everyone loved it. But he did that in the Indies, and he would do springboards. He did top rope moves. One of his finishers was a diving double foot stomp. And so I'm curious to see if we see more of that varied style from Tommy and Malachi Black than what we've been used to seeing from him since he got into NXT. If he's going to, dial it back to when he was Tommy End in the Indies. Either way could work, because I loved him in NXT as well. So I'm not saying it would be bad if he was wrestled that same way. I'm curious. There's different ways he could take it. And Cody Rhodes is a tremendous wrestler, as we know. So to me, I think this is lining up to be, I think, a really, really good match. It could main event the show easily, and there'd be no issue with doing it that way, because I think these guys could put on a main event level match, and certainly Cody's used to doing that.
For me, I think that obviously they're both quite capable of putting together an amazing, entertaining match that showcases all kinds of flashy moves. But to me, the what this match is about is it's the first chapter of a feud that probably is going to be. I mean, I don't think that this is something that's going to be a one and done. Which isn't to say that I mean, because it's not going to be a one and done, it's certainly possible Cody might win. To say, because of the fact that there needs to be a reason for it to continue. But that's not, even having said that, I certainly think that it would be more fun for Malachi to win. But either way, we're definitely looking at two characters who represent opposite archetypes and recognize that about themselves and are really leaning into it with the black suit and the white suit, the great poster image that they made with the white and black to set up this homecoming match, and they just seem like such, like we're sort of spooky superheroes, supervillains. We're wearing the same outfit week after week, and
yeah, even when Cody's in the gorilla position, he's still wearing that white suit.
I know, right? So
he's Cody. He gets to do that,
right? He can get away with it because I'm Cody. It's not weird that I'm wearing a flashy suit, even though I'm just doing my work.
Exactly.
But the other thing is that they're representing these really basic archetypes of, it's good and evil, but they're not representing them in a straightforward way because Malachi Black is sinister, but he's also, you want to root for him despite that. And Cody Rhodes is the white hat, but he's also kind of annoying. So it's a they have some subtlety added to that straight up white hat versus black hat thing that they've got going on, and I really can't wait to see where they go with it. And I hope that it's something that is storyline that carries through at least through All Out. We've got this first chapter of it here at Homecoming. But I expect to see more chapters for sure.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting if they did. Go ahead.
When we were doing the research for the article, one of the things we looked at was the role of Malachi in the Bible. And his role in the Bible was to basically present people, like make people see their sins. And if you translate that to a pro wrestling aspect, you could very much, especially in what they've done in the build up to this, like the promo where Aleister Black essentially told them, like, you're being booed by the fans that you think love you. It could very much be him being like, look at your pride, Cody. So that's something we found in our research, that it's very much in the same line of, like, he's wearing the black suit, but is he the bad guy, and is Cody the good guy?
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
That is a really interesting point. It's something you will only get on ProWrestlingMusings.com. So you got to check out the website for stuff like this. The silver lining to doing the podcast twice is the fact that I get to think of things that I didn't think of the first time around, and because we're talking about, Cody should lose this match. The last time I said that was before his match with Agogo, which obviously he didn't lose, and then people on the podcast persuaded me that it actually wasn't that bad of a thing, and I now agree. But because we made that comparison, I've now been fantasizing about this about Malachi Black and Anthony Agogo as a tag team, and their finishing move would be the Black Mass with a bolo punch, and it would just. They couldn't use it every match because they just run out of people to do that to. They'd all be dead after that happened. But thanks for putting that in my head, because it's never going to happen. But if it happened, that it's Yeah, that's what the video games are for, right? Like, yeah, whatever.
And people say that I'm the fantasy booker.
I can do an hour. I'll just do an hour talking about all my fantasy booking scenarios for a go-go. So maybe another time.
They can be called big strong kickies and big strong punchies.
Maybe we'll work on the name. Name might need a little bit of work, but the pieces are there. We'll put those together. Maybe that'll be for the future. But for right now, this has been a very unique podcast recording. But we have come finally to the end. 4 people, 3 hours. 2 of something else, 1 podcast that we end up with. So thank you all so much for listening to this. This has been a great time. We really appreciate you. And of course, Sergi, I've pitched Styles Make Fights enough. You should absolutely go read it, but I'll let him do it one more time himself. Sergi, please tell the people where they can find you.
I appreciate that. You can find me on Twitter or Reddit, Sergi Alderman, but also just check out Pro Wrestling Musings and go to the Styles Make Fights tab, and that will take you to my most recent article and to all the rest of them. And there's also a link to go to the Styles Make Fights dashboard. I don't believe that people realize that is something that anybody can play with and look around at like what different competitors in AEW, how their styles work against their average total or in a given match or a given range of matches, dates. There's lots of ways that you can mix and match the data to find the information, and that's how I write those articles. Yeah, go ahead.
It's well worth your time to check that out, just because you can kind of nerd out over all the stuff. Sergi does not have enough time in the day to write about every little number that's there, but you might have enough to look at some of the stuff that he didn't mention. So I would absolutely recommend that. Before we get to Jacob, by the way, because Dan wasn't able to finish the podcast, I do have to shout out something that he's been working on, a great project examining NXT call-ups to WWE and looking at win-loss records, pay-per-view records, titles. I mean, he's done an exhaustive search of all of these NXT call-ups, and it's really interesting stuff. So that is coming up on ProWrestlingMusings.com, also on Dan's Twitter over at Wrestling Rhymes. So I had to do that for him. I promised I would, but now we will get to Jacob. So Jacob, if you would please tell the people where they can find you.
You can follow me on Twitter at SaltyAcob. That's Acob spelled AYYYCOB. I've also been, of course, working on the 5 Directions series on ProWrestlingMusings.com. I do not yet have my own fancy tab, but if you follow me on Twitter, I will post it right as it gets posted on Pro Wrestling Musings. It'll probably come out on Tuesday whenever I wake up.
If you get one more insane prediction right, we'll get you your own tab. I've heard it in my ear from Craig. That's what he says.
When Jeff Cobb comes out next week, then we're getting that tab.
Okay, that's all right. Yeah, no, Craig confirms that's what's going to happen. So obviously, 5 Directions is the most prophetic wrestling article that you can find on online right now. So that's about the biggest pitch I can give for that. I have been Griff from GA. Check me out on my personal YouTube channel, General Admission Wrestling. And if you're not already, go subscribe to the Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel. We keep talking about all the cool stuff that's coming. I promise it is coming. I've been out of town. I've had some work, so I haven't been able to post as much, but we're getting back into the swing of things. So there is some really cool stuff that is coming to the YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe. If you're on Spotify, if you're on Apple, if you're on Podbean, wherever, give us a 5-star review. We've got some really cool stuff lined up with the podcast. Obviously, there's tons of stuff going on in the world of wrestling right now, so there is no shortage of things for us to talk about. So make sure that wherever you are, wherever you listen to this podcast, you can listen to every episode. You will not want to miss a single one. But until then, we've got Homecoming coming up, so everyone just enjoy as summer starts to come to an end here, and AEW just continues to get hotter and hotter. I mean, what else can I tell you? There's tons of stuff going on, so we'll be right back with you with the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast to talk about all of it. We'll see you next time. We really appreciate all of you.